Hi, this is Simon Obstell, and welcome to another tutorial in which we're going to be combining Blender with Apple Motion. Now, in this first part, we'll be building the main Lighthouse model, and it's going to look something like this. So I'm going to assume that you already know your way around the basics of Blender. And if you don't, there's a 7-part tutorial series that I've already produced that is well worth looking at to get yourself up to speed. Now, as I say, in this first part, we're just going to be using Blender, but as I'm sure you've seen, there's lots of interesting compositing that's going to take place once we get inside Motion. So let's get started with our build inside Blender. So here we are in a new scene, and I'm going to delete the default objects out of it so we can start afresh. And the first thing I'm going to do is to create the glass surround. So I'm going to add object mesh cylinder and come over here, and I'm going to set the number of vertices to 8 because that will give us a nice 8-sided box. And I'm going to set the radius to 3 and the depth to 6. So then I'm going to switch to edit mode, and I'm going to select the top face and the bottom face. I'm going to press delete and delete faces. Then what I'm going to do is switch back to object mode. I'm going to come over to the wrench icon. I'm going to add solidify, and I'm going to go for a thickness of 0.1. So let's commit that solidify by doing Control A. I'm not going to do a lot on the shading here, but I just want to make the glass transparent. So I'm going to click New there, type glass, and let's just come down here to the alpha and set that to 0.2. We can't see anything in the viewport, so let's select the material, scroll down until we come to the settings and set the blend mode to alpha hashed. And now you can see we can see it as see-through. Let's come back to modeling, and I want to create some bars for this window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this top row of faces. So clicking the Alt key near one of these intersections here on the top. So then I'm going to separate that. So right click, separate, selection. And I've called the main glass, and that separated selection as edge. Just going to turn off the glass. Let's add a modifier to the edge. So then let's make sure we've got the edge selected. Come to modifier, and we'll add another solidify and set that amount to, again, 0.1. We can turn back on our glass now. I'm also going to commit that solidify by doing Control A. So now we've got that as our top rim here. First of all, I'm going to change its shading. So let's set up a new shader by clicking here, new material. Let's call this metal. Turn that up to 1. And then let's set the base color to some sort of dark gray or something. As I say, I'm not going to be doing any work on the materials in this tutorial. So our edge is obviously the same width as the glass, and we need it to be a little bit larger. So I'm just going to scale it up 1.025 on X and the same on Y. So then we can make an array to fill in the rest of the edges. But first of all, we need to commit the transform. So click in the viewport, Control A, all transforms. Then select the wrench icon, and let's come to array. And we want a count of 5. And we don't want the X factor to be 1. We want the Z factor to be, not sure. Let's just scroll down. -15, and we can commit that array by hitting Control A. So now I want to add the vertical struts, and I could add a 3D cube or something to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edge there, come to edit mode, and come to loop slice, and I'm going to turn on snap, make sure increments is turned on, and then I'm just going to loop slice to there, and on this side, loop slice to there. And because the snap is turned on, those are snapping nicely, symmetrically. So I'm just going to turn off the glass and then turn on my see-through option there and select faces, select those there. Again, I'm going to separate them, separate selection. So I've called that separated selection strut. Just going to slightly adjust its scale. So let's come to the overhead view. So first of all, we need to set its origin to the geometry, origin to geometry. And then we can adjust its Y scale a little bit like that, just to thicken it out. And that's probably good. So 1.5, I think, on the Y. And then what we can do is we can extrude it. If I grab hold of its bottom faces, I'm going to come into edit mode, select these bottom faces like this, hit E to extrude. So I can extrude it downwards all the way to here, the bottom of the structure. Let's switch to object mode, commit its transforms. Let's set its origin to the 3D cursor, in other words, to the middle. And then what we're going to do is create an array. So add an array. We're going to select object offset, turn off relative offset, and we need to create an object for it to be rotated around. So let's select empty plane axes. Let's come back to that array. We can select that empty object. We want a count of 8. And then we need to come to our empty object and we need to rotate it on Z enough times or enough degrees, and that's 45 degrees. And that's given us this cage effect. So then we can come and commit that array, Control A. So then let's make a ceiling, make sure we're in object mode, add object mesh cylinder. Let's come down, this time we want it to be smooth, so let's set the vertices to something like 64. And the depth wants to be something like 0.2, I think. And we can move it up on Z till it's sitting here just above, and then we'll need to adjust its scale in just 1 second. So commit that. Let's come over and we're going to scale it on X. So let's go for like 1.25, and also on Y, 1.25. Maybe a little bit too much. Let's go for 1.15. What we might just do with this is add a quick bevel. So add a bevel, just very tiny, 0.02 is going to be enough. Let's commit that bevel. And then let's duplicate this cylinder. Shift D in the viewport. And then we can hit G and Z. And we can just move it down. We'll need to turn off the snapping, just so we can get it to sit where we want it to. So GZ. And we can just align it to the bottom of our cage like that. And this one we want to be a little bit wider, so let's go for, I think, 1.3 and 1.3 on Y. So I've renamed those floor and ceiling and given them both that metal texture. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to build the entire rest of the lower structure using this one object. So let's make sure we've got snapping turned on and increment. We want to switch to edit mode. We want to select faces and then select this bottom face. So we'll be using 3 tools, the Inset Faces tool, the Extrude tool, and the Scale tool. And the shortcuts for those will be I for Inset Faces, E for Extrude, and S for Scale. So first of all, I'm going to hit I, and then 0.5, and then Enter. And then E and 6, and Enter. Zoom out a little bit. And then I and 0.5, and then Enter. Then S and 2, and Enter. Then E and 2, and Enter. Then I and 1, and Enter. Then E and 40, and Enter. Let's zoom out to see what we've done. And then finally S and 1.5, and Enter. So then I want to add a bit of a bevel to this platform here. So I'm going to Alt-click on those faces to select all of them, and then come over and select the Loop Cut tool. And then because I've got snapping turned on, I just want one step below the top there, and one step above the bottom there. And I'm going to select those two loops there and then hit S and 0.99 just to create that small bevel there. And then I'm going to rename that as base. Then I'm going to switch back to object mode. I'm going to come to add mesh and UV sphere. So I want 8 segments, 32 rings, a radius of 3, and that Z location I want to be 3 as well. So that's my roof, and I just need to chop off the bottom of it. So select it, come to edit mode. Let's look at the front view here. Select faces, enable the transparency, and then select those faces and delete. Missed a row. So let's select that row, delete faces. So then select object mode, and let's rename that sphere as roof. And let's come over to shading and give it that same metal material. So then I want some guardrails to run around this plinth area here. And now I realize I've actually made this plinth a little bit too small. So in edge mode, I'm going to select these 4 edge loops and then hit the S key, 1.25, just to increase it a little bit more. So then I'm going to switch back to object mode, and let's look at these guardrails. I'm going to add object mesh torus. I'm just going to scale it up on its major radius so it's matching that plinth more or less. And let's zoom in a bit, and let's just reduce that minor radius so they're fairly thin like that. What have we got? We've got 0.075. And let's maybe go for exactly 6 meters on that major radius. And then if I have a look at where we are, we obviously need to move it down on Z. So select it, GZ, and move it down to around there. I've got snapping on, which is why it's snapping to that point. So then Control A to bake those transforms, and then we'll add modifier array. Let's have a count of 4. Let's zero out the X factor. And for the Z factor, let's have 4.5. So those are our guardrails. And then let's hit Control A to bake that modifier. Then I want to add mesh cylinder. Let's just move it out on X like that, so it's matching our guardrails. Zoom in a bit. Now move it down on Z using our front view. And let's have fewer vertices. Let's have 24 there. Radius of 0.2 is good. Depth, let's go for 4. So that's our post. Just going to switch over to edit mode. Make sure snapping is off this time. Select loop cut. I'm just going to make some loops just here, just above those rails, just here, just below the top, and another one here, just about there. And then I'm going to, in faces mode, select that loop of faces. That's all clicking on them, and just scale it out like that, just a little bit using the S key. So then let's switch back to object mode. Just going to adjust the position of those rings a little bit on Z, just bring them down so it looks better to the eye, something like that. Then I'm going to select that post, bake those transforms, Control A in the viewer, add modifier array. Let's turn off relative offset, let's turn on object offset, let's select our empty. Let's come to the empty. We want a Z angle of 45 degrees. Let's come back to our cylinder and let's set that count to 8. And now we've got 8 posts going all the way around. And let's do Control A to bake that modifier. And come over to shading. And I want to give it a new material here. So I'm going to call this black metal. Make this black. And then let's increase the, or rather reduce the roughness and increase the specular so it's nice and shiny. So you can see what I've done roughly there. Roughness, specular, looking like that. And then I'm also going to select that torus and give it that same black metal material. So now we've got something that looks a bit like this. So then I'm going to make a new collection and I'm going to call it lamp. And then I'm going to come over, make sure I'm in object mode, add mesh, plane. I'm going to set the scale to 0.25. And then I want a Z rotation of 45 degrees. So let's just hide that master collection and focus in on our plane there. That's period on the number pad. So Control A to make those transforms. Add modifier array. I want a count of 10. And I want a Y factor of 0.2. So the X factor is 1, and it's giving us this nice array here. So bake the array, Control A, add modifier. And this time we're going to use screw. And then I'm going to select Y for the axis. And then you can see the effect we've got. Need to increase the resolution, so 48 steps for the viewport and the render. And then Control A to bake that screw transform. So turning back on our master collection, you can see what we've got here. So I'm just going to move that new lamp forward on Y. So I'm going to go for -2, just to move it forward like that. And you can see it's all much too big. So I'm just going to set that scale down to 0.8 on X and Y. Sorry, 0.8 on X and Z, I should say. And then I'm going to select it in the viewer, Control A, all transforms to bake that. So then I'll rename that plane as lens. Turn off the master collection. Then what I want to do in object mode is add mesh and cube. I want a Y position of -1.25. I want an X scale of 0.1, and the Z scale I'm going to increase to something like 3. And then I'm going to set the origin to the 3D cursor, and I'm going to set that Y scale to 2. Then I'm going to rotate it through 45 degrees on Z, Shift D in the viewport to duplicate it. This duplicate I'm going to set to -45 on Z. I'm going to select both of them, Object, Join. So now they're joined together. So reselect the lens, come to Add Modifier, Boolean, and use the picker to select the cube. And you can see I've chopped out those holes in the lens. Then I'm going to bake that Boolean. That's Control A. Come to Edit Mode. Make sure I've got the transparency turned on, and enable the Select Lasso mode in the selection tool and draw around those faces. Delete those faces. Draw around these ones here. Delete them. Switch back to object mode, and now I've got my lens cut out. A little bit of an issue in the middle there, and we're going to sort that out. Let's zoom in. So switch back to edit mode. So we're just going to draw around those faces. Again, we're in lasso mode, and then delete. And then switch to edge mode and Alt-click to select that inner loop there. Switch to the side view, G and Y, and then just move it out just so it's protruding a little bit like that. And then with those faces still selected, hit F to fill that. And let's switch back to object mode. And you can see what we've got. So F just fills in that hole. Then I'm going to re-enable that cube, or make it visible again. So I want to first of all set its Z rotation to 0, switch to edit mode, make sure the transparency selection is on, select faces. Let's switch back to select box for this. So selects that, delete those faces, switch back to object mode. Then I'm going to set that Y scale to 1.1, and then that Z rotation back to 45 degrees. And that's now kind of fitting with our lens pretty well. And then Control A to bake those transforms. Then add modifier array. So turn off relative offset, turn on object offset, a count of 4. Let's select empty as our object, come back to our empty, change that Z rotation to 90. And now we've got 4 instances of that box. So come back here and Control A to bake the array. And then let's come over to shading and let's give it that metal material. Then let's reselect the lens. And again, we want to make an array of it. So let's double check that we don't need to bake the transforms, but let's just do it anyway, just for safety. Control A, all transforms. Come to the wrench icon, add array. Let's have a count of 4. Turn off relative offset, turn on object offset. Let's again select empty. And we've got the right count in, we've got the right rotation in there in that empty to give us that array. And Control A to bake the array. So then what I'm going to do is rename that cube as supports. And then holding down the Shift key, I'm going to drag the lens over it. So now the supports is the master for that. And we can rotate the supports and the lens rotates along with it. So then let's come to animation and come to the first frame. Let's set a keyframe for the Z rotation at 0. Let's move forward for the last frame. That's 360. I've extended the end to 360. And then let's set that Z rotation to 360, hit a keyframe. And the other thing we need to do is select that keyframe, interpolation type linear, and now we've got the rotation. We can't see it quite, but if I switch the view mode, we can see it here. So now the good thing is that that rotation is going to translate through to the GLTF and then on through reality converter into the USDZ that we're going to bring into motion. So that's the first part complete, and I hope it's been a good workout for your Blender modeling skills. Obviously in part 2, we're going to be doing the much more interesting thing of compositing all of this in motion with lighting and so on. So I hope you can join me for part 2, and thanks very much indeed for watching.